This is a question which, very complex question, but I think the textual critics have been pioneers on the internet in a way. And I come to think when I was a graduate student and I took a Greek course, and I became interested in these manuscripts and the textual apparatus in my Greek New Testament. And there wasn't anyone around, in Sweden. It was a specialist. They were few, I can tell you. And I got connected via the internet to a large community of specialists. So there was this electronic journal, the TC journal, and there was a related discussion list, TC discussion list, where you had all of these giants in the discipline discussing text critical matters. And as a student, I could ask a few questions maybe. I didn't want to give any replies, but it was an important forum for me. And I got connected to Hurtado, Ehrman, Peter Head, a whole array of scholars who had these very interesting conversations on textual criticism. So that's just one example, which was really helpful for me. So I even asked on that list if anyone could help me with a subject for my bachelor thesis, which someone did, Morris Robinson, and we got connected in Münster, and I did a project there, actually collating manuscripts. So I think thanks to the internet and these forums, actually that really helped me to get on and in my own specialization as a person rather isolated in the north. Yes, I would change. I mean, when I did my work, a lot of was to assemble the raw data. And that means you have to go to the manuscripts and read them and transcribe them. And I used microfilms. I mean, I collated about 560 manuscripts of Jude, and those weren't available. I mean, they are scattered all around the world. So in the past, you had to travel to all these places or send for photos. But I could go to this German institute in Münster, and they have a large collection of microfilms, 95% or more of all the manuscripts. So I wrote them and had permission to come each summer for every year during my dissertation work. And I sat there for weeks collating. And we had also a collection in a university library in Sweden. I managed to track down that collection because another Swedish scholar back 50 years ago or so, he made a study of Jude too. So there was still this collection. So I had two places where I could go mainly. But nowadays, those manuscripts are being digitized. CSNTM is, of course, a major player. And university libraries, institutions, they are putting things online. So it's tremendously helpful. Then my wife would have been happy because I wouldn't have to go to Münster. But on the other hand, you get to meet scholars there and be in an environment which is also a fabulous experience for young scholars. So it's not just advantages of having everything on your knee, on your computer, in your lap. So there are all sorts of fantastic tools available now. I had access to one brilliant tool, which was Collate, the Collate software developed by Peter Robinson. And that was very helpful in order to compare the variants in like 560 manuscripts. Without that software, I think it would have been maybe impossible. It would have been possible, but it would have taken an extra year or so maybe. Now I could enter the files, the data in the computer, and it ran the comparison. So computers are really good at comparing. Yeah. So now I would use as many digital images as I could. So CSNTM, they offer online a fine repository of digital images, and I would look for the Epistle of Jude. I mean, it's not extant in all of these manuscripts. Some are Gospel manuscripts, but the Apostolos manuscripts. And actually, there is one new manuscript, at least, or two, with the Jude on the CSNTM in the collection. So that's helpful for my second edition. And now a team in Münster and Birmingham, they have teamed up to produce the Editio Critica Maior, and in that process they have developed some good electronic tools for making an edition. And that's from the start when you transcribe manuscripts, and when you set the variation units to be compared, when you edit the text, and when you add patristic data, versional evidence, and so on. And all of those tools are collected in the NTVMR, and they call it, I think, a workspace for collaborative editing. It's not just limited to the New Testament textual tradition, but it's a tool which can be used by anyone who wants to produce a critical edition of a work. So I would surely use that. Again, it's a difficult question because there are so many unexplored directions. I mean, you are tempted to think that we have a New Testament, isn't that enough? Isn't it, almost perfect? Nestlalan 28, it's, but there are so many things to do in terms of individual manuscripts, for example. Westcott and Hort, they said that it's crucial to study the documents first, and then you can make judgment on readings and so on. So the study of documents, I mean, that's a vast challenge. There are some manuscripts which have received a lot of attention, like Codex Sinaiticus. There was a large project, many studies, a conference which brought together many outstanding scholars. But I mean, there are more important manuscripts which deserves doctoral dissertations and so on. So some of these manuscripts, the major uncials, they have received thorough study, but there are still a lot to do in that area, to study individual manuscripts, to learn more about the scribes' habits, and so on. And then you have, of course, the field of patristic citations, which are also important in the field. And that's work which takes a long time, because you have to use a very rigorous methodology to be able to analyze the patristic citations, their context and their value for establishing the New Testament text. And some of those guys wrote a lot and they cited a lot. So there you have work for many doctoral students. That's another area. And I think also these large endeavors like the Editio Critica Maior, they will take a long time. They need funding, and it will take decades before the whole New Testament is, I think, thoroughly analyzed, and all the parts of the New Testament are edited and published in that series. But I think still that work may need revision in the future. So the IGNTP is the International Greek New Testament Project. And nowadays, it's not actually running the project, but it's more an advisory board for the collaboration between ITSI in Birmingham and INTF in Münster. And we get regular reports from the editor, David Parker, on the progress of the ECM, the Editio Critica Maior, which is the major undertaking, a large major critical edition. And we're finishing John now, and we want to go ahead and start with Paul. But it all depends also on successful funding applications. So we're struggling with that issue also. And the IGNTP is, well, an advisory board really of international specialists. And as a secretary, I just try to coordinate the meetings and preparing agendas and so on. Yeah, most of the scholars of New Testament studies, they use these standard editions like the Novum Testamentum Graece, Ernest Laland in his 28th edition, which is the similar text to the same text as UBS 5 now. But these are just hand editions, and the evidence is very limited, and there's a selected number of variants in the apparatus. And as you probably know, there are thousands of New Testament manuscripts. So these smaller editions, they're just based on one part of the evidence. They have done some selective, by selecting the most important manuscripts for establishing the text. But there are many important manuscripts, and there are many more variants which could be studied and should be available in a larger apparatus. So the idea with the ECM, the Editio Critica Maior, is a larger edition really, and to make it available for exegetes and students, scholars of the New Testament. The first problem was to select manuscripts from all of the thousands of manuscripts. So the Institute in Münster, they developed a method to select maybe 10% of the most significant manuscripts. And after that, they had to devise a method how to reconstruct what they call the Ausgangstext, the initial text. I don't know if that's a good word for it, but that is something else than the original text. There has been an initial phase that we don't know what happened really in the beginning with the text, but the initial text is the text which is possible to reconstruct from the evidence which is extant. And Gert Mink, one of the scholars of the Institute in Münster, he developed a new method for doing this work on the many manuscripts, and that's called the coherence-based genealogical method. The problem with the New Testament textual tradition is contamination. So one manuscript may have been copied from an exemplar, but it may have then been corrected from another manuscript or several manuscripts, and that creates a kind of contamination between. It's not like a neat genealogical tree. So it's a very complicated textual tradition, and you have to find a method to deal with this contamination. So the coherence-based genealogical method was designed to overcome this obstacle and to find a way to reconstruct that initial text, and then also what the edition does, it gives you a lot of textual evidence from in the Catholic letters, which came out a few years ago, the full volume. For example, in Jude, there are over 100 manuscripts included in the publication, so you can really trace the textual history too, even if you don't agree with the choice of the editors. And what has happened more is that they at some places in the text, you cannot really decide which is the Ausgangstext or the initial text. So you have maybe two parallel variants which are considered equally valuable, and that's also a new trend in the production of critical editions, I think. So there was a time when Nestle Aland, those editions, almost became like the new Textus Receptus, and I think we're seeing now a more humble position.